You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Greetings, exalted ones, and welcome to this week's episode of Reaction Chats, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. This is your one and only polite spoiler warning. If you haven't had a chance to watch part 4 of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, then pause this episode now, because we intend to spoil the heck out of it. Now, you may remember in part 3 of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ben and Leia made their way to the planet of Maputo, where not only the Inquisitors are still hot on their heels, but Darth Vader himself. Ben and Leia are helped on their journey by an ex-Imperial officer Tala, who offers to smuggle them off-planet via the Hidden Paths, a secret underground railroad used to smuggle Force sensitives to safety. But before the pair can even start on their way, the village is decimated by Darth Vader as he forges his own path of destruction, intent on finding Kenobi. Knowing the only way to protect Leia is to delay the Dark Lord, Kenobi once again confronts his former apprentice, but the 10 years of inactivity, coupled with his emotional turmoil, has left Ben unprepared for Vader's onslaught. Burnt, battered and bruised, Kenobi is only saved by Tala and her load lifter droid, who has been ordered by Leia to return to help Kenobi. What will Reva do with Leia? Will she detect any Force sensitivity in the princess? And can Obi-Wan make it back to rescue the old Iranian princess before she is delivered to Darth Vader? These were the questions we were left with last week. I'm Mark Mulcaster. This is Reaction Chat. Joining me this week, as always, is my brother in the Force, and the only other person I know who can not only swing watching an episode of Kenobi at 8 AM in the morning, but has time in his busy schedule to sit down and to record a Reaction Chat. That's right, it's Mr. Mark Newbold. So Mark, how's things, and what's your first impressions of Part 4 of Kenobi?
My first impression was, wow, how cool that they've nodded to so many iconic and indelible little moments in other Star Wars properties and still made it feel as fresh as that episode was. Really enjoyed that.
It was a really interesting mix of, like you said, nods to, and, you know, they've moved the story along quite a bit. And it was interesting because I had wondered where they were going to take it, and going and basically storming Fortress Inquisitorius was a great kind of way to kind of really shift the dynamics of this story and open it up to different possibilities, and also create a lot more tension for the next episode.
Yeah, I didn't realise the Fortress was in the same system as Mustafar, which again was quite interesting.
Yeah.
And having that sort of, obviously, the juxtaposition of the water planet and the lava planet, obviously, that's an obvious one. But just when you realise that most of that, like an iceberg, most of that is under the water. And you knew that because you saw scenes in previous episodes where, you know, the big sharks and stuff were swimming by the window. So that was understood. But when they show the map of the fortress and you realise, you know, so much is going on and they only know a certain amount, and, you know, even their intelligence doesn't tell them everything, and then you're in there and it's quite evident that this is a monstrous building, and moving it to a totally new, visibly new location. You know, we're not on Tatooine anymore. We're not on Dayu anymore with the neon. We're moving around. You know, last week it was quite a sparse, unimpressive world, of which I would imagine 80% of planets in the Star Wars galaxy are just deserts or forests, or they're just scrub, because that's just how it is. The incredible worlds and the remarkable worlds stand out because there's so many relatively dull worlds, and this just gave us a different visual, but also we're in an Imperial installation now. There was some big value to that.
Yeah, it kind of creates an interesting take, because we've had Death Stars and we've had Starkiller bases on ice planets and that. So kind of having like a big fortress pretty much half submerged creates that real fun tension, especially when we kind of find, you know, later on the glass breaks and suddenly, you know, got water against Kenobi and everybody else, as well as like the stormtroopers and stuff. I think the first part, and so far I think pretty much every one of these episodes has started emotionally really strong. So we find Kenobi in a Bacta tank. You know, you get burnt. Where else are you going to be? But we have a really interesting juxtaposition between Kenobi and Anakin, and also both of them wrestling with what's just happened and the flashbacks and their thoughts and stuff, which I thought was a really nice touch, because other than that, we don't see a lot of Vader in this part, which I think is probably not a bad thing.
Could really over-egg it with Anakin/Vader, Vaderkin as I used to call him, back in the Revenge of the Sith days. They're using him just subtly enough. I think you'll see more of Anakin, more of Hayden, let's put it that way, in Ahsoka. Because I think a lot of us thought there'd be a lot more flashbacks. There's sort of flashbacks to moments, but not actually, let's recreate a scene from Clone Wars or from the movies with Hayden and Ewan now. I certainly did. I think a lot of us thought there'd be more of that, and there's been none of that. I really like that because whilst we're hearkening to the past, we're very much in the now. And whilst Kenobi's fueled with regret and obviously a bit of fear, not just for himself, but for the future of the galaxy, Anakin is fueled by the same moments, but it's fueling his rage. So it's the same events fueling two very different people in very different ways. So to overuse Vader would be a mistake, because when Vader comes in, that's the impact moment, and he certainly has plenty of impact in this episode.
What's really cool about this proto-rebellion era is the fact we are seeing all these kind of pockets of resistance and rebellion bringing up, which are totally not connected to each other.
Yeah.
And in here, we've got the people who are running the hidden path and that, and, the guy in charge basically saying, well, look, my wife was Force sensitive, and we allude from that, but basically she was taken and is no longer. But even, straight from the start, we then get these nice little nods to the OT trilogy when we mention T-47s and that as to how they're going to fly onto the fortress and that. And I thought that was quite nice. And I was like, yeah, but hang on a sec, T-47s don't actually have hyperdrives. But we find out later you don't need a hyperdrive, you just need a bigger ship. Jumping ahead, when they did fly in and kind of take on everybody, I was like, hang on a sec, how the hell did they get there? No, to be fair, this is the one series where I'm not really concerned about plot holes. They seem to have stuff covered pretty well, and they seem to have done their research, which you would expect, obviously, but it doesn't seem like they're having to make big stretches in logic to kind of justify a story point.
Yeah, and like I say, there's a confidence that they've got a lot of easy misses in the pocket, because anything like that, if they'd have not explained that there was another vehicle there, people would have been like, how the hell did they arrive on the planet? So they've got obvious things covered, which gives you confidence to not pay massive attention to the smaller details like that. As soon as they turned up on the screen, I was up in my seat going, snow speeders, and then I caught myself and went, air speeders, because snow speeders are converted air speeders. Yeah. That was all very neatly done. But yeah, there's lots of things in this episode that just remind you of moments from the past and even moments from the future.
So we kind of basically find that Reva is interrogating Leia, and there was that risk, wasn't there, that they could have just cut to a chase and basically just brought in the I'm glad they didn't, and I'm glad that there's a bit of back and forth, and actually Leia gets to play off Reva than she has been able to so far in the series. There was a part of me that was thinking, don't tell them to go to Dantooine.
I thought that.
There was just that moment where I was thinking, I don't think for a second that, Leia would ever given up Ben's or any of their locations and anything. But at the same time, don't make that one too obvious Easter egg.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other risk, and Reva does try and kind of probe her mind a bit, but Leia, and I love Leia's comment about, we having a staring contest. I thought that was quite fun.
Which was kind of a Poe Dameron vibe to that, I thought.
Very much, yeah. A little bit cheeky, a little bit sassy. And I thought, well, is this where Reva discovers that Leia's Force sensitive? But it doesn't seem like she has, which is quite interesting, because I think, at least for me anyway, in the back of my mind all the time, it's this kind of overarching risk that, Leia could be discovered, and then if Reva knows, she's probably going to tell Vader.
Yeah, and another thought that occurred was thinking of Vader talking to Tarkin, resistance to the mind probe is considerable. That was obviously the touching point for that. And I thought the same about the mind probe, so I'm glad that never came about. That would take something away from the scene in A New Hope. If that had happened to her before, it wouldn't have the same weight. But the thought that Leia, was on Fortress Inquisitorius at the same time as her father, because Vader turns up and, gives the third sister a proper dressing down, that kind of made me think, because it's clear in A New Hope that Vader and Leia have crossed paths before. There seems to be an awareness of more than awareness of each other. And like I say, Vader would be infamous across the galaxy by A New Hope. Certainly, you're 20 years after, the end of Revenge of the Sith at this point, 19 years after. So his legend would be considerable. But yeah, just her, the way she was delaying, it was almost like classic SAS training. Delay as long as you can, delay as long as you can. At some point, you're going to give up your information or you'll die. Yeah. And, Eustace was dead. So that's when Tala came in with that great double play, double spy moment to try and throw everybody off. And that was a very brave diversion, because I didn't think she'd get out of that.
No, I had her down to probably not make it out at the end of this episode. So it's a pleasant surprise, because I think actually Tala as a character and the way Indira Varma's portraying her, I'm really getting on board with that. Kenobi, as he enters into the fortress, and it's great to see the Jedi rebreathers back in action.
Yes, Phantom Menace, yes, spotted that.
As a Phantom Menace, that's like, yes. Because actually, I think that this episode, more than any so far, has been obvious misdirects to things. So, for example, when he took out that first Stormtrooper, I'm like, don't get into some TK armor. Please don't get into Stormtrooper armor.
I did think that was going to happen. I've got to be honest. I did. When he came at the he saw the guy floating in the water.
Exactly.
I was like, I thought he was going to take his armor.
Yeah, exactly. Which would made perfect sense, especially considering like the disguise they try to use to get him and Leia out. I was just like, no way is that beard Imperial regulation. There was no way
that was just straight out of a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You might as well have been stood on each other's shoulders.
Yeah, I was going to say you'd almost expect her to be on his shoulders or something. So that's what I've really liked about this episode. Is, we've seen sneaking on Star Destroyers and battle stations and stuff like that before in Star Wars, but it was nice to kind of see it again with Obi-Wan, and a couple of like nods, the fake Force sound that kind of distracts the stormtroopers.
Yeah,
we get that amazing, painfully, brutally obvious homage to A New Hope when Indira has to kind of go and dispatch that other senior Imperial officer, and she just leaves the comm on the desk. And it's like,
visually,
I wouldn't be surprised if they did something very similar to what you did out in Death Valley, where they had a screen grab of like the scenes from Mos Eisley, and you just line up the camera because it was so spot on. I was just like, that's just perfect. And that I have absolutely no problem with. I thought that was great.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
I knew straight away from the moment the power went off when Little Leia's on that chair, you're like, right, this is when he's going to ignite the blue and he's going to take on the stormtroopers. Yeah. But again, the chair thing is something that we kind of see Han being subjected to in Empire Strikes Back, and we see Poe and we see Rey being interrogated by Kylo Ren in Force Awakens in a similar kind of chair. I was trying to work out the mechanics because everything is set up way too high for Leia because she's probably only about 3.5 foot or something. But that scene just worked really well. And to be fair, a little bit of Star Wars convenience. You've got a probe droid down one end of the alleyway, and you've got stormtroopers down the other end, and you've only got one guy in the middle who can deflect so many blaster bolts from one direction at a time, yet they miss each other.
Yeah.
It's just like, but that's kind of the fun of Star Wars. And, obviously if they hit him, then, it will be a whole different story entirely.
But didn't you think when they were in that corridor, the water corridor, that logically that those walls will be like transparent steel, that you would make those walls to be blaster resistant like the trash compactor in Star Wars, so that they were just magnetically sealed. So, when they're shooting, you see the first blast hit the window and Leia looks at it and you're thinking, oh, you can see where this is going. Don't get me wrong, it was a great sequence. It was basically Moses holding back, the Red Sea sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In a logical sense, it was the one thing that really I thought didn't make sense. It made for a great sequence, especially with him just staying one step ahead of the water to get to the blast doors. Even though I expected water to be pooling out even before the doors shut, but nevertheless thought that a few stray blaster bolts would take that out. And also, the stormtroopers, the rush of water would probably knock them senseless anyway, because obviously it's the ocean's just come into that room. But it was always my understanding, and I don't know what you think, that stormtrooper armour, you could survive in like a vacuum for like 10 minutes or something in a stormtrooper armour. That there was you could survive long enough to try and figure something out, call for help or figure something out. So if you can survive in a vacuum, you think you could survive underwater? Clearly not.
I just wonder if that Star Wars physics and logic kind of going on, it's that the plot needs it not to work. I suppose one could say, well, they didn't have their seals done up because they weren't expecting water or something like that.
You could retcon it, couldn't you?
Exactly. There's means and ways around it, but it was just a good kind of nice scene to create a little bit of tension. So was there any specific kind of things that jumped out to you that you really did or didn't like about this episode?
I loved the fact that you were literally watching Ben get his mojo back. Even with the sabers, with the stormtroopers, it looked a little bit clunky. And then as he starts fighting in the corridor, it's like muscle memory starts to kick in. There's that one moment where he twirls his saber, and I'm like, there's Obi-Wan. It's not Ben all of a sudden, it's Obi-Wan again. That was very cool. That was a very visual moment. Seeing the airspeeders, as we mentioned earlier, was awesomely cool. When you see the one sort of sitting there above Reva and just pummeling to keep her occupied, firing away, and of course he gets taken out, and you're thinking, oh, he's going to try and fly over, she's going to catch him with the saber. And when he gets away, you're thinking, oh, maybe he's going to survive this one. And then she takes him out with that sort of box.
Fuel cell or something.
Which made for obviously a moment of sorrow, and the nice juxtaposition at the end of the two pairs of characters. Obviously Ben and Leia have that lovely little moment where she just puts a hand on his hand, and I thought that was really sweet. I think the big takeaway from this one, two things really. One, the fact that Lola has got the tracking beacon on her, and two, maybe this is how Vader's plan in A New Hope to put the tracking beacon on the Falcon, maybe this is where that came from.
That's what I was thinking. And actually, whilst I was sat there, because there was like quite a few kind of nods to like the sequel trilogy, one of which I'm a little bit kind of scratching my head about, and that's the fact that all the pilots so far, the dead one at the start of the episode and the two airspeeder pilots, were wearing Resistance era X-Wing pilot helmets. If that's my only real major complaint from this episode, then, that's just going to be one of those things. It's probably not going to be brought up by many people unless they're used to looking at pilot costumes. But, I mean, it's an interesting thing because I think those who are lucky enough to go to the Mandalorian exhibit at Celebration, some of the Rebel Legion members are saying there's sequel trilogy era costume component bits scattered all over those costumes in bits. It's just, and it is going to be that whole thing of let's just grab it. It's off the shelf. The airspeeder coming in a little bit Deus Ex Machina because there really wasn't another way to get them out. They'd kind of set it up at the start, so we knew who these characters were. We kind of knew that they were going to be able to help. They had the airspeeder, so it wasn't like it was completely out of the blue. Yeah. There was a certain level of plot convenience there, I feel. But it's not a big deal because the set piece kind of worked really well, and I thought it was really cool seeing all the stormtroopers being taken down. Yeah. I was expecting Reva to use a lightsaber, so quite nice actually they did something different. And maybe actually it also goes to show that possibly she's not that well trained. She can hurl something, but maybe doesn't necessarily have the control with a finesse of a lightsaber, for example. Yeah, but I'm more convinced than ever from what we spoke about on the last episode that the big fight at the end won't be Ben versus Vader, it'll be Reva versus Vader. Just feels like they're building to something there because when Vader comes storming in, and he really came that was like storming through the Hoth rebel base and just lifts her up and holds her there, and she can just about Lando squeaks the words out when Chewie's throttling him, sort of gets the words out, put a tracking beacon on, and he doesn't drop her, he stops force choking her and still holds her in the air while she says her piece. He meant what he said in that last episode, fail me and you won't live long enough to regret it, and here he comes, he's going to finish her off. That was very interesting that she was just strong enough to get those words out and say. And then you're thinking, well, we've had an episode of stalling tactics and diversions. Is this her stalling tactic and diversion? No, that final shot where Lola's eyes glow red like, the Seeker droid that we saw on the base, which was very cool, like a mini probe droid. There were a couple of moments that just, like you say about the sequel trilogy, that visually reminded me more of the sequel trilogy than of the original trilogy. And this is 10 years before the original trilogy. So we've kind of midway between the two trilogies there. But there were certain bits that looked to me more like the First Order than the Empire. The whole fortress, the interior, I think most of the corridors kind of did. And, if you compare it to, let's say, on board a Star Destroyer or the Death Star, everything in the Death Star is more of a grey, isn't it? It's more kind of grey and white. And this is a lot more contrasted. There's a lot more white and black or red and black. Some of that, the red and black, for me anyway, I can explain that design note just based on the fact that, they're the secret police, aren't they, of the Emperor. They can have their own different design. But it doesn't necessarily mix as well as if we look at, say, Rogue One. Where Rogue One obviously a lot closer to when A New Hope starts, but built and made around the same kind of time as The Force Awakens. Those sets felt more authentic OT era. These do kind of have those sequel trilogy callbacks. And obviously, the First Order takes a lot of its cues from the Empire. Of course it does. We've not seen all of the Empire, but like I say, there was just a few moments I thought that feels way more First Order than Imperial. Thankfully, when Lucas released Star Wars in 1977, you could probably name 20 iconic characters, locations, vehicles, planets from that one film. Mass cultural splurge in one go. It still looks fresh and it still looks right, and it's so indelible a template that they can go back to that film and riff off it and directly lift from it, like they did with the communicator and lots of little things, and from Empire, because obviously the Seeker droid is like a probe droid from Empire, yada yada, and just make it work. So they're very fortunate in that sense. I just hope they don't stray too far from the design cues that we know from A New Hope, because it works so well. It's a risk, isn't it? And it could partly come down to, again, budgetary constraints. It could just be down to the art direction, and it's just one of those kind of things. As you said, it's a big empire, And the logic, or at least my assumption anyway, and you should never assume because it makes an arse out of you and me, is the fact what we see in the Death Star, what we see in the Star Destroyers is basically just going to be replicated everywhere in the galaxy, because that's what, you do. You mass produce everything. You wouldn't necessarily have a bespoke installation per garrison and stuff like that. But then again, this is a fortress. This is different. We've never seen a fortress. We've not even really seen much of Vader's fortress. We've only really seen a couple of rooms in there as well. So that could look completely different.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
The big poignant kind of moment really was when Kenobi was walking down that trophy hall with all the dead Jedi. I mean, what did you make of that?
Actually, what I will do, Mark, is I will read you a paragraph, Sanders' guide. Obi-Wan finds out that they are hiding down dead bodies at the secure sector of the fortress. When he says as much to Tala, he looks at the body of Teresa Nube, a popular Jedi often seen in the Clone Wars. So there you go. It's likely that all of these individuals are Jedi or Force sensitive. When he first enters, you see a male human and an Ungri body. The second body after Teresa Nube appears to be more like an Imperial advisor like Sate Bastage, when the third looks more like a partisan belonging to Saw Gerrera's group. The first unknown female is probably meant to be reminiscent of Padme to continue the allusions to her and Anakin. The other woman is an unknown, and your best guess is as good as ours. The last one is interesting, however. This youngling matches the one seen in Part 1 as the same actors are listed, Jonathan and Oliver Ho. So yes, it is a kid from Part 1. So, as you say, a trophy cabinet. And, we've always seen carbonite. This was more like amber, the Star Wars version of preserving a body. And it was exactly like you say. It's a trophy room. It was quite grim.
The thing is, what they did with Jurassic Park, and they extracted DNA out of the amber. Again, you kind of think, is this all leading on a really long-winded, windy kind of road?
To the Dark Trooper project.
To the Dark Trooper project, but also to Exegol and the Clone Emperor.
I think you're right. I think all these things, they're laying down so many threads that feel disparate, but I think ultimately, we've talked about this before, people got frustrated with Rise of Skywalker because so much in Rise of Skywalker wasn't explained in Rise of Skywalker, and there's a lot of assumption and a lot of gap filling, and I think Shadow of the Sith, Adam Christopher's book, which is out very soon, that will fill in certain elements of that. Also, when you look back to prior storytelling, you'll see little waypoints. And I think the Dark Trooper project could be one. And I think there's lots of little things that will lead along to other avenues and all come together to make what happens at the end of Rise of Skywalker, the return of Palpatine, make way more sense. We live in the Star Wars galaxy, essentially. So just because they don't explain it, do a big Basil exposition moment in that film and explain everything, just because people take the mick out of somehow Palpatine has returned, I think that line, as ridiculous as people say it sounds, I don't. I think there'll be an explanation for that, but it will be seeded across lots of other Star Wars media. Well, we're Star Wars fans. We read the books, we read the comics, we watch the TV shows now. Who cares if it takes them 3 years to explain it? I'm all in, so bring it on.
You're right. And I was just thinking exactly that was basically at the end of the day, you can think maybe in a couple of years' time, we can look back over 5 years worth of storytelling.
Yeah.
Or maybe more. And actually, so when we go and rewatch Rise of Skywalker and that somehow Palpatine returned, to them, it was just like Sith magic. But to us, we know that there's been a plan in place since day one of his control of the galaxy as the Emperor. And then it all starts to kind of like make sense. And, again, I think maybe someone like Acolyte might kind of, again, start building and bedding in some foundations for that kind of Sith philosophy.
Palpatine wasn't the first to try it, was he? Plagueis tried it, and it didn't work. And he killed him in his sleep, as he explains in Sith. Star Wars extrapolates a lot, but it also retcons a lot, because they leave big gaps. And I think by design now, I used to think it was just the way the stories were, but I think they leave these things by design. It's like, well, there's a thread there we can pick up in this show or that show, or we could tell a whole series telling that story. Like this, we knew the legend of Ben Kenobi, and we assumed a lot of what happened between Star Wars and going back to Sith, headcanon. But now you're learning a lot more about relationships, about why Leia called out for Ben. Lots of connective tissue that makes really good sense.
And also, this is the reason why she calls her son Ben.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, because the relationship now is far more, 45 years on from Star Wars. And you're realising, there was always that moment where Luke's on the Falcon as they leave the Death Star and he's disconsolate. He's like, I can't believe he's gone. And Leia's puts her arm around him. And a lot of people are like, she's just lost her whole planet. Now he's putting it in a totally different frame of reference. Like we were talking about Owen. Owen only knows the horizons of his moisture farm, really. Nothing beyond that is a concern to him. As long as he can provide for Baru and they can survive, and everybody within his area is okay. That's really the top and bottom of Owen's world. And so Luke is dropped into that small worldview to the point he stands on the ridge of the homestead and looks at the twin suns and the music swells, and we all think, oh, he wants to go and follow his destiny, but he really wants to join the Imperial Academy because he's bored of Tatooine and wants to see some of life. Yeah. Leia lives in the core worlds, doesn't want for a thing, is raised to be somebody of importance. They've got totally different worldviews, and here it all starts to blend and come together, and it's working really well.
All the things that we can pick apart and disagree with Star Wars and modern day Star Wars storytelling.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of genius with this. This Kenobi story could have easily been set 1 or 2 years after Revenge of the Sith. But yet they've set it at a point where it still gives you a lot of space before, and it still gives you a lot of space after to, the wiggle room. There's obviously subsequent series and additional storytelling, which I think is kind of fascinating. For all we know, we could end up with a Reva spin-off, and it could be a prequel about how she kind of rose in the ranks of, Inquisitorius. Totally.
Yeah, completely. And like you say, she's becoming an increasingly fascinating character. This one, the good cop, bad cop type thing with Leia, trying to wheedle the information out of her. And I think she susses pretty quickly that Leia's a tough and quite sharp kid, has to just resort to probably the torture rack that turned her into an Inquisitor, because they've kind of hinted heavily that, that young Jedi were taken and forcibly brainwashed almost, because she alludes to I lost things too. She's saying it's going to hurt, kid, but it hurt me. So, and I'm still here. Yeah. So, there's that bitter edge to everything that she's saying. I'm convinced Marvel will do some sort of spin-off comic. Certainly it feels like, there's a Claudia Gray novel, pick an author, somewhere down the line telling the story of Reva, like they told the story of Phasma, for example. There's definitely some interesting areas they could go with a character like that, and how she rose through the ranks to become, an Inquisitor, because it doesn't just automatically happen.
Hi, this is Hugh Quashing. I've had great pleasure in recording this interview for Fan for Tracks.
One area that we haven't actually really talked about is obviously the music. For me anyway, what Natalie Holt has done is done a real perfect balance between the kind of John Williams style of music that we get with Yoti, but also with the tribal music on Tatooine. It's kind of that more Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett style vibe. And I think the themes that she started to play with and riff off, especially for the Empires, is really clever.
Yeah.
What do you make of the music?
Totally agree. Love it. I mean, season 1 Mando, they put it out as a sort of as a free download, basically, and then you could buy that beautiful box set, the vinyl box set. And I really wish they'd release it on CD. I really wish they'd just pick 12 of the best hits and just stick them out on the CD for Mando and for Book of Boba, which was every bit as good, because it is riffing off Williams, and it feels very much in that wheelhouse. And I love that Williams came back and did, the main theme for Solo. And John Powell's score is probably my favourite Star Wars score since Phantom Menace. He's come back and now done the main theme for Kenobi, and Natalie Holt riffs off that. It really helps having that kind of music, because it's Ben. It couldn't be more OT. It's unfair to say that because it's smack in the middle of the 2 trilogies, but you know what I'm getting at, because we know where we're headed. It's teasing you musically towards an endpoint. And of course, Kenobi's physical endpoint is A New Hope. We know he lives on beyond that in other ways, even to the point of Rise of Skywalker, where he's egging Rey on at the end. Ewan came back for that. So, there's lots of little teases and nods, but also it's such an enjoyable theme to listen to, the music just generally. And we've not seen the episodes nearly enough, and not heard the music really in isolation, apart from Williams doing the main theme at Celebration the other week. More of this, please. I hope this means that she will, like I hoped John Powell would come back, and there's no word of that, sadly. But if there is ever anything more with Solo, which looks unlikely, but if ever they get to that, then I'd like to think they'll bring John Powell back. Natalie Holt now has really announced herself in the way that Deborah Chow announced herself on Mando, and she's now got Kenobi. I feel like Natalie Holt has gone, well, she really gets the crux of it and the feel of it. It feels like it fits. It feels like it should be there with the action that we're watching, so I hope we get more from her.
Final thoughts and predictions then for the next episode or two.
Is Lola smart enough to deviate from what's been programmed into her, or is she really going to just lead them back? Because it can't all be a steady growth. There's got to be moments where they get swatted back as they're trying to build towards something. Otherwise, they would have attempted Scarif or Yavin a lot earlier, because we know there was seeds of rebellion before the Empire was started. That basically, Bail and Padme and all those characters had started talking about it because they could see where it was going in Revenge of the Sith, and obviously they edited a lot of that out, Mon Mothma. So, if it had just been a steady growth for all the years that it was, I think they'd have got to a point of making a big leap to do more about it a lot earlier, because the Death Star, we saw at the end of Revenge of the Sith, they'd built the superstructure, or a large element of it, and of course she comes online for Scarif and for Rogue One, but nevertheless, there's got to be moments when they get put right back, and maybe this is a moment where Ben is now once again involved in a moment of tragedy and feels guilt for it. I can't just see it going well. There's more tragedy to come, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. At the end of the day, if it was that easy, they would have defeated the Empire, I think, a lot sooner. We're 10 years out. There's got to be still a point whereby the Empire is wiping a lot of these pockets of resistance out when they find them, rather than people just escaping. I mean, maybe one or two people will escape. Obviously, we know Ben will escape. That is of course, assuming that they don't discover Tracker in Lola before they get to a planet and maybe make a left turn at the last minute. It seems like it's heading to have Vader and everybody else kind of rain down on them pretty hard for the next episode. So we shall wait and see how things develop with that. On that note, I think that is all that we have time for today. If you want to reach out, with your own thoughts, theories, and kind of reviews or questions about Kenobi, you're more than welcome to. Mark, can you let people know how they can get in touch?
I certainly can. If you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Like for the main show, like for reaction chats or any of our other podcasts, get your questions in. We will talk about anything and everything. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube, and check out Fanthatracks episodes on Fridays at 7 o'clock UK for new episodes of The Panther from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, and Cannon Fodder. And that's me done for this episode.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that, my friend. And I think it is very much you done for this episode and me done for this episode. So until next time, everybody, stay safe, enjoy the discussion and the chat, make sure that you keep it fun and friendly online, and of course check out Making Tracks when it next drops. So until then, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's Planet Leia.